It's the amazing Rico Brogna podcast with your host, Evan Roberts.
For the first time, it's an off-season Rico Brogna. Oh, my God. That's depressing to even say. I was hoping this was going to be like the 8th Rico of the week, previewing that Met-Yankee World Series. Unfortunately, we live in the reality that this Met season that brought us so much joy and so much shock and so much surprise did actually end 4.5 days ago when they lost to the Los Angeles Dodgers. Welcome to Rico Brogna. First of all, I do want to apologize. Believe it or not, and I think Hoff and I take this as like an accomplishment, this is the longest layoff we've had between Rico Brognas ever. I'm not talking about during the regular season. I'm talking about ever, because we always, even at the bare minimum, give you a Rico Brogna sometime Wednesday night into Thursday morning, and definitely sometimes Sunday night into Monday morning. Obviously, over the last 2 months, that schedule has been times by 7. We've basically done Rico Brognas every single day. The reason we both went this long without a Rico, and by this long, I mean 4 days, which is a record, and we're proud of that. And that includes Christmases too, by the way. The reason it took us so long is because both of us got sick. And I would blame us getting sick on the New York Mets. I would say that the New York Mets took so much out of us and brought us so much, not just excitement, but pain and work and aggravation, that eventually it wore us down. And it's funny, I sat there with Hoff in his office, not mine, in his beautiful office on Friday. That was about a week ago now, when the Mets were playing Game 5 against the Dodgers. We had been on the air, so I didn't go to the game. And we sat there, and we were both coughing, and we were both banged up. And we looked at each other and said, I think we're just worn down. And not to say that doing the Rico Brogna is work. It's not work. We love doing it. We love talking about the Mets. We love communicating with you guys. But I think when you do it every single night for late hours of the night and you sleep very little, eventually it gets to you. So we both assumed we were completely worn out and just tired. And you could probably tell if you watched or listened to the Rico Brogna after they got eliminated. I was not in a great state, including the following day on Evan and Tiki. Well, we both got sick. Hoff's been banged up for a few days. I'm now finally recovered. So believe it or not, our plan was, even after the season ended the way it did Sunday night, was to actually continue Ricoing at a very frequent clip. But it got the best of us, and we both got beaten up. We are now recovering. Hoff is a little slower on the recovery right now. I feel a lot better. I'm also drugged up, so that probably has a lot to do with it, Pete. I'm on the performance-enhancing drugs that have somehow gotten me to where I'm much healthier. I'm just coughing a lot. That's all.
Yeah, you must have gone through like A-Rod's doctor or something like that, and I'm going through like, I don't know, like Matt Noakes's doctors. And
I don't think Matt Noakes ever did steroids, so you should probably apologize before you get sued.
No, I'm just saying, like, clearly he didn't need to go get juiced up. He never went juice. He never did steroids. So that's why I'm not recovering as fast.
I got you. Because you could have gone with someone who did steroids and they just weren't any good, like FP Santangelo. Right. No offense to FP Santangelo. I don't mean to insult him, but a guy of that nature, where you're like, steroids didn't really help. Anyhow,
Brian Roberts.
He did have some good success, Brian Roberts. Either way, we are back. And I do promise you this, while we are going to probably have more frequent Ricos than just the Wednesday, Sunday schedule I described, especially as this offseason heats up, that's always the Rico Brogna schedule at the bare minimum. So especially during Christmas season and holiday season, we always guarantee multiple Rico Brognas every single week as we get you through this offseason. Couple of things, because what we're really going to examine today on the Rico is David Stearns' post-mortem press conference. If you guys missed it, even if you heard it, what we have done sometimes on the Rico, and we're going to do it today, is we're going to play all of his answers. And then I'm going to respond to what I think of it. Maybe I agree with him. Maybe I think he's lying to us. Maybe I'm drawing a conclusion from it. So if you haven't heard David Stearns' press conference, great. It's new to you. Even if you have, It's a chance to kind of slow play it, and we can all examine every answer he gave together. Before we continue, how are we feeling? I think that's a very important question because I can tell you how I'm feeling. And I want Met fans to understand this. I am not being negative. I am not telling you this season sucked or this season was a complete failure. I'm not saying any of that stuff. But it is still, I don't know, hurtful. I'm still disappointed. And I think that it is okay to have two different emotions. It's okay to say, hey, I'm still really disappointed this season ended the way it did. I'm still disappointed that I live in a city in which the other baseball team, the New York Yankees, are about to partake in a World Series, and I'm jealous. And that's okay for us to feel that way. It's okay for us to still think about moments from Game 6 or maybe other moments in this series that maybe bother you and think to yourself, man, things could have been different. That's okay. That does not mean that I am telling anybody listening that this season sucked. It didn't suck. It was an amazing season. I think we're all very different in terms of how quickly we can just get to that happy place. I'm not in that happy place. Now, am I depressed? No. Am I walking around? I'll do this for you, Pete. Am I walking around work like a loser? Well, I do that anyway, so not sure if that matters. But it's okay to still have the disappointment of a season. I don't believe as fans, all of us are literally just going to turn a faucet and be like, oh, yeah, it was a great year. I'm good. Thank you. Thank you. May I have another? And so to be honest with you, as we talk about this team, and maybe that does tinge some of my opinions, I am still kind of dealing with the cloud of disappointment that this season ended. I will tell you this, and this is something I've been reflective of over the last 4 days. When the Mets have had seasons end in the postseason, and there aren't that many, it's kind of funny when you think about that. But if you go through every time the Mets have had a postseason series end, there are usually so many regrets and so many moments in a game or series that make me say it could have been different and it should have been different. I mean, 2006, I think, is the easiest one to parse. It's so easy to think about that last at-bat and say, I envision a line drive up the alley and we win the pennant and the whole world is different. And by the way, you can go a lot deeper than just that Game 7. But that's easy. That series against the Cardinals is so easy. The Subway World Series against the Yankees, so easy. Whether it's Game 1 and all the missed opportunities, Timo Perez always gets the most attention. Armando Benitez could not put Paul O'Neill away. Like, there are a lot of examples from Game 1 where things are different. Mets win Game 1. It's a different World Series. You could even think back to the way that series ended in Game 5. Kansas City 2015, same thing. The one-game playoff, the wild card game in 2016 against the Giants, same thing. It's usual for that. 1999 against Atlanta, a year that I thought had some similarities to this. It's so easy in that game, Game 6, where they made the incredible comeback and had 2 blown leads, to say, this happens differently, we win. There isn't a lot of that with this series. It is, and it's a reminder that while I'll criticize the missed opportunities or maybe some of the decisions Carlos Mendoza made, the Mets they got their ass kicked. Like, that's really what I'm trying to say. They got their ass kicked. In a 5-game series loss to the New York Yankees or a 5-game series loss to the Kansas City Royals, I can find so many more examples of if that's different, we win. That's 5-game losses in the World Series. But I can do it. It's easy. We can do a whole podcast on it. I have a tougher time doing that with this series. And I guess in a way that should make it easier, right? Like, okay, well, then what you're saying is we got our ass kicked. What you're saying is it wasn't that close. And the reality is it wasn't that close. And I think if we want to be fair about it, and we're being honest, not all 6-game series are the same. Not all 5-game series are the same. I remember once saying after the Yankees won the World Series in 2000, I know you guys beat us, and I know you guys beat us in 5, but damn it, that was a close series. And every Yankee fan said, you're a loser. Close series. We beat you in 5. And by the way, there's a reality to that, right? Like, if you win in 5, how close was it? But yet, game 1, Mets could have won. Mets should have won. Game 4, the Derek Jeter light bulbs game, as I like to call it. Could have won. Should have won. Denny Nagel comes out for David Cohn in the 5th inning to face Mike Pat. They could have won. Game 5. Could have won. Should have won. What game are we saying that in this series of the 4 that we lost? Like, we got our asses kicked in game 1. We got our asses kicked in game 3 and 4. The closest example to it would probably be game 6. And at the end of the day, yeah, they had a lot of missed opportunities, but we kind of got our ass kicked. So, I don't know. Does that make one feel better? Does that make you feel better? Does that make me feel better? Does that make you feel better, Huff, at all, or not really?
No, it doesn't. I mean, listen, I think at some point in time we're going to reflect on this and say that this may have been one of the greatest seasons in Mets history, that they didn't go win a World Series, but it's not right now. I don't feel good. I can't feel good. I understand like they beat the crap out of us. And I'm gonna watch the World Series. I'm gonna see how the Dodgers play the Yankees and see, was it us? Was it just bad timing? Because here's the thing: is if the Yankees win, then to me, if depending on the fashion of this whole thing, if the Yankees win in a very easy fashion, it almost makes it worse. And if the Dodgers win in a quick way, it's like, all right, I guess we lost to a better team, but it still doesn't make me feel good.
Yeah, by the way, both scenarios you described, to me, it's not going to change anything. Like, right. Remember, the Yankee thing, and the Yankee thing is a real thing. I don't want to ignore it. The Yankee thing is about the fact that we have neighbors, brothers, and sisters that are Yankee fans. And when your team doesn't win, our team didn't, if you're listening or downloading or subscribing to the Rico Brogna, especially at this point in the Rico life cycle, we are no longer, the hot girl everybody's watching out. We are now for the diehards. And we've always been for the diehards. But you know the way it is. The Mets are on a playoff run. There's going to be a lot of people tuning in or checking out or hanging out who are like, yay, we're on a playoff race. Now we're for the diehards. So understand, we could all communicate as diehards. We don't want to see the Yankees win because we're jealous of them. And that's okay. Like, they should be jealous of us if we were in the World Series and they weren't. So I think when you bring up, if the Yankees beat the Dodgers, what does it mean? It doesn't mean anything for what happened in our series. It just means that it sucks. Like, it shows you, I guess, the difference in my life personally. But in 1999, which I brought up a lot as a similar year, the Mets lost their 6th game to the Atlanta Braves brutally. The Yankees had just eliminated the Red Sox in 5, and they advanced to the World Series. And it was the Yankees against the Braves. It is the one World Series in my lifetime, as a diehard baseball fan, I could not watch. Couldn't watch it. I think it's the one World Series I don't have any games scored. Couldn't watch it. Now, as a 41-year-old who also happens to be doing sports talk radio in New York, that's not an option in 2024. And I've also, maybe it's the maturity of it. I swear to you when I say this, there's a part of me that's accepted our defeat, as disappointing as it was, and actually finds myself intrigued to this World Series. Not excited, but intrigued, ready to watch it, ready to put the IBO helmet on and say, I'm going to watch a World Series with two teams that I'm not like in love with right now. I couldn't do that when I was 16 years old. That's for damn sure. I was ignoring every part of it. I was ignoring that World Series the way the girls used to ignore me. It was basically the same thing. But the Yankees being there makes it tougher. I don't think there's any question. Let me read a couple of your emails, and then we'll listen to David Stearns, I promise, on this post-mortem edition of Rico Brogna. Peter writes, whimper, not with a bang. It was a nice run. The bottom line is this team was too gassed. Manaea bleeped the bed. Maton was a disaster. And the common thread for this team all year, stranding runner after runner after runner. The Dodgers knew how to get a big hit at the right time, and unfortunately we don't. You cannot strand as many runners as we did in this series and expect to come out on top. When it's time to dissect this team in the offseason, the core of Alonso, McNeil, and Nimmo need to be broken up. If you're keeping Pete, then you need big-time protection, and you need starters who can go 6 to 7 innings. This formula this year was lucky, but streaky and not sustainable. I give him credit that even after all this success, we're back to we got to break up the core talk. Ralph writes, the Dodgers were better, but you just can't ... Awful ending to the season. You have to keep Edwin Diaz in there the whole way. We lost the series because of Mendy. Game 3 and 4, Winker needed to be in there. That could have changed everything. Disappointed, but I knew they were better than us. Enjoy the offseason. By the way, why do the New York Jets always kick us in the nuts when we're down? It's a great question. They added, I guess, to the insult of Sunday night. Yeah, I think Edwin Diaz staying in the game, I know we were asking for a third inning from him, but his pitch count was not incredibly high. I know for him it was. I think it was 25. I agree. I think that at that point with your season on the line, you go into desperation mode. And one of the desperate things I would have done was I would have kept him in. I completely agree. Final email before we get to David Stearns, and I think this is the perfect kind of voice to hear from before we hear from David, is Negative Dan. Look, there's a part of me that feels similar to Negative Dan, because what I will own to you, and I have no regrets because I say what I say. If I'm right, I'm right. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I own it. Was that drunken Rico. We did a drunken Rico all the way back in August. Mets have recovered from their season, obviously. They were playing relatively good baseball, and they were in the midst of that very funky West Coast and to Seattle. Boy, how I pulled that out of my ass, I don't know. But that was the trip. And so we were doing a drunken Rico in the midst of that trip. I was on vacation. And as I was drunk, I said, come on, guys. You know this team ain't making the playoffs. You know they sucked us in. We're having fun. But you know they will let us down. And I think that for the final month and a half, that drunken thought I had was really my thought, which was, we're good, we're decent, we're fun. They're going to let us down when it matters the most. And that's very Negative Dan-like. It's almost like Negative Dan put that in my head. But luckily I was wrong and Negative Dan was wrong, because the one thing I will say is I have no regrets. I'm glad we had this run. I'd rather have the run than not have a run at all. You know, I know it saves the pain of it ending, but there was some fun in the middle, and I don't want to ignore that. So Negative Dan writes, the team needs to follow the Knicks script. I get that they made it around further, but this season perfectly equated to what the Knicks accomplished this past season. Performing way above expectations, a superstar emerging, and after coming up short, they need to take a play out of the Knicks playbook and part with the guys that the fan base may not be in favor of wanting to move on from, the way Julius Randle and Dante DiVincenzo was moved for the benefit of the franchise. Players like Pete Alonso, Brandon Nimmo, Jeff McNeil, and Edwin Diaz have been more, or have had more than their fair share of opportunities to prove they can take this team where they need to be. And this offseason needs to be a complete, non-emotional purge of all the dead weight this team holds. I know we're all in love with the pitching staff, but I can't in good conscience tie myself to any of them going forward. If this truly was an evaluation year, then the main takeaway was Lindor cementing himself in the middle of this franchise. There are going to be many tough conversations that need to take place after this year, and especially you, Evan, need to be on board with changing this for the benefit of the future. This is a great stepping stone to build off of, and I'm so confident that Stearns isn't going to succumb to keeping guys that he shouldn't just because of fan pressure. It's Lindor and the kids going forward, and I couldn't be more excited for what the future holds for us. So, a couple of things. Number one, we don't even know if what the Knicks did was correct. I mean, they are 0-1. No, I'm just kidding. I think what the Knicks did was correct, even if it doesn't work. And for those that aren't basketball fans, I'll explain this. It's basically the Knicks said, yeah, we had a great year. We're proud of our great year, but we know we need to be even better. And so we're going to make uncomfortable decisions. We're going to trade guys that are popular with fans to make our team better. And by the way, I'm not against that. Now, I admit there's an emotional attachment to players that has a value, But I want to make this clear because I know that I was very sentimental about Jacob deGrom, still am. I think the Jake deGrom leaving Rico is one of our most popular, which kind of makes me sad that's, people want to hear me cry. Okay, fine. Jacob deGrom is very different than Pete Alonso. Very different. I'd like to have Pete back. And I think it would be a lie to say that emotional attachments don't exist. Of course they do. But I think deGrom was different because I view him, and I viewed him, but I still do, as a generational Hall of Fame talent who we developed. And I didn't want to see him pitch for another team. Pete Alonso, yeah, there's an emotional attachment, obviously what he did in the postseason, but before that, being one of those guys that can own every slugging stat in the history of the franchise. But there's also a tempered, hey, you got to do what's best for the team. So I'll get this out of the way now. I don't think it needs to be a linear choice, but I've had this question a lot over the last few months. Would you be okay losing Pete Alonso if it meant signing Juan Soto? Well, I think that's a dumbass question because as much as I love Pete, and I don't think you have to choose between the two, but people ask that question, so I'll answer it. You'd have to be a moron not to want Juan Soto on your team over Pete Alonso. And that's not a knock on Pete Alonso. It's just a reminder that one player is this, my hand's very high in the air, and the other player's this, my hand's still high in the air, just not as high as the other hand. So I get it. And by the way, if the Mets did that, if they pulled off this offseason where they signed Juan Soto to some kind of mega contract and Pete was gone, and David Stearns and Steve Cohen sat down and said, look, we have a lot of money. We're going to spend it. We need it to be smart. And if we're going to give a guy $50 million a year, every year for the next decade and a half, we love Pete. We could not pay him his ask and what he eventually got from the Houston Astros, which is $27 million a year. I'd understand it. I'd even condone it. I'd say, I agree with you. So I'm okay making decisions that I think are best for the team. What should not be misunderstood is when we argued about Pete Alonso, while some of it was emotional, a lot of it was he is best for the team. Having a reliable slugger like that, who's only gotten better defensively, I hope people have come around with me on that, was best for the team, that he's not easily replaceable. But if you're telling me, and I don't think the offseason needs to come down to this question, hey, look, they signed Juan Soto. They want to go cheaper offensively at every other position, kind of let the kids develop. Vientos is going to play first. Mauricio is going to get a chance at third. You think I'd have an issue with that? I would not. So, yeah, I'm all good making non-emotional decisions. And I shouldn't say non-emotional. There's emotion attached to everything, but it's not going to supersede what's best for the baseball team.
Well, okay. So if that's the case, I understand your point. If Soto is the only move they make, because obviously, and by only move, only big impact move, because
offensively.
Well, I would say in general, but sure.
No, but Pete, it can't be only because they have a whole pitching staff they have to address.
Well, right, exactly.
Their pitching staff is basically all free agents. We'll go more in depth on this over the next couple of weeks. Like we'll go through every name. So they can't just sign Juan Soto and call it a day. And by the way, they don't have to. They have $170 million coming off the books.
No, but what I mean is if Juan Soto is the big fish they get, and then they go another offseason where they get, quote unquote, the Sean Manayas, the Luis Severinos of the world, where they're kind of like projects. I don't think that's a big fish. Listen, they need to address the starting pitching, but they're not going out and getting the Corbin Burns.
So
is that enough?
So I'm going to look at things separately. I have to.
Okay.
Like offensively, as an offensive team, if you told me they were going to somehow, and I think it's a long shot as we talk more about this, but they pulled it off. They were the highest bidder for Juan Soto, and he decided to leave the Yankees and sign with the Mets. I mean, I don't know where I'd put those odds. I wouldn't say they're zero. I'd say they're not above 50. I'd say they're somewhere kind of under that. I would be willing to build the rest of my offensive team with the young pieces that I have and with the position versatility that I have. Absolutely. Offensively, I can't bring it to the pitching because there are so many decisions that need to be made about this rotation, whether it's maintaining Manaea Severino Quintana, whether it's going after an ace like Corbin Burns or Max Fried. So I don't think it's as simple as that. But yeah, I mean, I think Juan Soto, I don't think I need to convince anybody, is such a brilliant offensive player that if you got him and you gave him the $50 million a year that I think it's probably going to take, I will gladly let Ronnie Mauricio figure out third base. I will gladly tell Drew Gilbert, all right, you're going to get a chance to play. I will gladly, let's say, Mark Vientos, you're the first baseman. I think he's that good offensively. I think he makes that kind of impact. And by the way, I think the Mets agree with me. I think he's going to be the priority this offseason, and he will dictate where the rest of this offseason goes.
I mean, listen, I get the philosophy. I just think that that's a lot on a young team. And I understand, like, Juan Soto is the best in baseball. So I'm not, and again, he's going to be 20. He's 25 right now. He may win his second World Series. Like, I'm not knocking him whatsoever, but I just don't see how a 15-year contract, sign him for as much as you want. That's great. I still think you need other pieces around him if you want next year to be as good as this year.
I never thought that I would ever utter this sentence. And we're going to do a podcast where we grade the performances of guys this year. Biggest surprises, disappointments. We'll do some letter grades. Mark Vientos, Juan Soto, and Francisco Lindor for the next decade. Sign me up. I can't believe that Vientos entered that conversation after what we would have said a year ago. Like, as we were sitting here a year ago thinking about next year's free agency, imagine going to a time machine and all of a sudden I'm like, yeah, Vientos and Soto, baby. That's a 2-3 from hell. Like, who wants to deal with that? It shows you how amazing this season was. But speaking of Soto, speaking of Pete Alonso, speaking of free agency, the president of the New York Mets, David Stearns, met the media the other day, and he had a lot to say. And we're going to try to do our best to decode what he had to say. So this portion of the Rico Brogna, we analyze, overanalyze what David Stearns had to say. It all began with an opening statement.
Thanks, Ethan. Thanks for everyone for showing up this afternoon. I'll say a few words and then happy to take any questions. You know, I think whenever the season ends, it's not a lot of fun. It stings. It still stings for me right now, and it will for a little while. And it should. That means we care about it. That means we're doing something important. That means we made it far enough for it to really hurt. I'm also really proud of the group, the entire organization, the effort, the skill that went into getting to where we ultimately got. It certainly wasn't a straight path. It took some moments of real resilience for us to ultimately get there. And I think in some ways that made it a little bit more special and also a little bit tougher when it ultimately ended. And I think some of what we learned this year and maybe some of the identity that we were able to organically create as an organization will serve us well going forward, that we can carry it going forward and can continue to build off of what we did this year. I also am keenly aware that nothing is predetermined. Our success this year does not mean anything for our success next year. We've got work to do. I'm energized by that work as an organization. We feel like we're in a really good spot, and we're ready to go. And we're eager to build off of this and create the type of sustained competitiveness that this organization deserves, that our fan base deserves, and that we believe is attainable. And happy to answer any and all questions.
Well, first of all, the stinging part, thank you, David Stearns. For any Met fan who's lectured me, get over it, Evan. It's all good. What a wonderful season. Let's have a party. I'm disappointed. It stings. I'm with the team president. It's supposed to sting. You lost the 6th game of the National League Championship Series. That's not something we've done very often. We don't get to the League Championship Series very often. And yeah, there'll be a moment where we laugh and have a celebration of, oh, what a great year. But it doesn't happen days after the season ends. I like how he understands this team needs to continue to get better. The chemistry thing. Chemistry changes so violently from year to year. In fact, 1 year ago at this time, we were hearing about how the locker room was broken. We were hearing about all the things that went wrong in said locker room that contributed to the Mets falling flat on their face. A year later, this is the greatest locker room ever assembled. And you have to ask yourself a question. Well, what's the difference? Is Francisco Lindor different? Is Pete Alonso different? Is Jeff McNeil different? Is Brandon Nimmo different? Or are the guys around him a little bit different? I think it's fair to say that the guys around him are different. You know, the pitching staff was so different. Guys like Sean Manaea, Luis Severino, obviously Jose Iglesias. And so I bring this up because I don't know if Jose Iglesias is going to be on this team next year. I have an opinion on it. I would bring him back as long as he doesn't get some kind of insane contract elsewhere. I wouldn't give him an everyday job. I think he'd understand that. He's an important piece off the bench. He's our Kiki Hernandez, if you will. Or he's our Jose Iglesias, because that's what he was until Jeff McNeil got hurt and he became an everyday player. But chemistry is very tough to bottle. And I think that's a part of one area where I did have disappointment, that I know it's tough to bottle. And the Mets may have a better roster next year, but they may not have that same magic. They had the opposite of magic 2 years ago. Then they had amazing magic this year. I can only hope that 2025 brings something great. Anyhow, let's listen to some of the questions. Question number 1 to David Stearns.
You just mentioned the organic identity that this team had. What is the challenge of, maintaining that and having it be a part of winning culture going forward, while also recognizing that you have double-digit free agents? You're going to have to rebuild this roster quite a bit.
Yeah, so every year is going to be different, and the formula is different every single year. The mix is different every single year. That's also an opportunity for us to continue to grow and get better. There are also some key core elements that we can carry forward. The passion with which we played, the fun with which we played, along with the seriousness with which we pursued winning and competed. Those can be constants. Those should be constants, even if the formula and the mix on the field is a little bit different.
Yeah, it's very tough to measure that kind of stuff. I don't think for a second when Jose Iglesias was signed to that minor league contract, they ever thought that he would not only get up here, but be a big part of the chemistry. It's very tough to bottle. And I think it's one of the most difficult jobs as a general manager and team president. You wonder, no matter what David says, how much they think about that. Or if it's really, let's just go get good players and let's hope the chemistry works. Let's listen to more questions for David Stearns.
Just regarding, probably your biggest free agent, what is your appetite to retain Pete, and how much, if at all, did the last 3 weeks maybe change or alter your opinion of him?
Pete's a great Met. He was right out there right before I came in. I told him I was about to answer a lot of questions about him. He told me good luck. He's a great Met. I hope we have him back. I think we both understand this is a process, and everyone's got their own interests. And Pete deserves to go out into the free agent market and see what's out there, and then ultimately make the best choice for him and his family.
These are always so tough to read, because I think back to what Billy Epler said about DeGrom. We had a good conversation. We'd love to have him back. And here's the reality about Jake years later now. I think it's safe to say the Mets really didn't want him back at the price or anywhere near the price he ended up getting. And who knows if Jake really wanted to come back. You do get the sense that Pete likes it here, that Pete wants to come back, but then it comes down to the appetite. David Stearns has a great poker face, man. I'll give you that. I was in a room with him in spring training. How many times I tried to get the answers on Pete Alonso? How many times I tried to get an idea like, do you like him? Do you love him? I'll tell you this now because it's after the fact. And it was weird when he said it to me. David Stearns seemed very open to the idea of, hey, if things go bad, we could trade him and he could come back. And I called BS on that. That's something I've even said on the air. I think that's BS. It's a fallacy. And he's like, it's delicate, but it can be done. Trading a guy away and then being able to sign them later as a free agent. Now, luckily, that's not something the Mets are trying to do. They're trying to re-sign him off of a playoff run. But I want to address the first thing that was asked. Hey, did the last 3 weeks affect your view of Pete Alonso? I don't think it affected David Stearns' view of Pete Alonso one iota. Here's what it affected. It affected our view on Pete Alonso and how much pressure we as fans are going to put on this team to bring him back. Like, if those 3 weeks doesn't happen, I don't think David Stearns is going to react to a small sample size. I think he's going to evaluate Pete the player. He's going to evaluate what he thinks Pete is over the next 3, 4, 5 years, depending on what kind of contract he ends up getting. I think that the backlash, whether the Mets care about it or not, that was affected by the 3 weeks. If he doesn't hit that home run against the Brewers, Met fans, most of you, wouldn't have given a rat's ass if he left. It would have been the easiest goodbye to a free agent, a homegrown free agent the Mets had ever had. And I think by the success that he had, the backlash will be a little bit harder. But you'll see it throughout this David Stearns press conference. He has a very good poker face.
Hey, David, how do you maybe anticipate balancing how much he means to the franchise versus maybe how a player generally at his position entering his 30s may age?
I think all of that is important. Who Pete is as a person is important. What he means to this franchise is important. Who he is as a player is also important, and what he contributes on the field. There's no magic formula to this. There's no equation that spits out what all of that is for us. And so there's judgment involved. There's evaluating the market involved. And we'll see how this process goes throughout the offseason.
It's very tough to read these answers on Pete because, I think they like him. I think they kind of want him back. I think it really just comes down to what does the market say. And what that also tells me, by the way, is this is going to take a while. That the Pete Alonso decision, one way or the other, is going to drag out. I don't necessarily think it's going to drag out the way the other Boris clients did. I'm not saying we're getting to spring training here, but Juan Soto starts free agency, in my opinion. I think that he signs. I was having this conversation off air today. Our boss was saying, hey, when do you think Juan Soto signs? And I said, December 5th. He's like, December 5th? Why is that? I said, right as the winter meetings are beginning. Because I don't think Juan Soto needs to wait. I think all the offers are going to come in. He's going to sit there like a king, and he's going to just decide, whatever that decision is. And he's going to go somewhere. And I think everyone else, it takes time with. And I think Pete, trying to develop a market that will eventually develop, I think it's going to take time. And so I don't think Pete signs before the first of the year because I think that there is going to be that poker game between Alonso and Stearns in which they're kind of figuring out, okay, well, what's his worth?
What do you think is more likely? Pete Alonso signs a deal worth, $8 million, 8-year deal for $200+ million.
No,
or a qualifying offer with the Mets.
I don't think either. I think they're both very unlikely. I think the qualifying offer is out. I think there's going to be a better market for him than that, despite him not having maybe the kind of free agent year he wanted. I'll tell you why, by the way. I'll give you a reason. Because I think that if this failed, if free agency doesn't work out the way he wanted, I think he would get more than the qualifying offer on a short-term deal, even from the Mets. If the market just doesn't develop and he won't accept whatever longish-term deal the Mets are willing to give him, I think he could come back and get one of those pillow contracts where it's like, all right, here's a 2-year deal, let's say $24 million a year, which is higher than the qualifying offer, and an opt-out after the first year. I think the Mets would do it. Why would the Mets be against that? Like, I would want to give him as much money as possible on a shorter term deal if you're concerned about him breaking down or his age or you're still not sure, things like that. So I don't think he has to accept the qualifying offer. And I'd be genuinely surprised if he got the contract you also described, a 7 or 8 year deal. And I'll tell you this, if he got that contract, it will not be from the New York Mets. He'll be on a different team if that's the case.
Yeah, I just hope that he's disappointed with what the offers are, and his safest bet is to come back to the Mets for a short-term deal. I want him on the Mets at least one more year. I want him to break the home run record. I want him to get another shot winning a ring. That's what my ideal goal would be. But again,
my ideal goal is a 4-year contract. Like, I think a 4-year deal is reasonable, and I don't think it's that risky. You know, I just don't. I don't think he's going to break down that horribly over the next 4 years. And look, I know businessmen may not look at it this way. I'm not sure if David Stearns would look at it this way, even though he's a Met fan, and he did admit that there's an emotional attachment when you make a decision like this. I think in a 4-year deal, even if it backfired, it's easy to say, all right, we're paying him for what he did. And even though that doesn't necessarily work for you, it's easier to rationalize than giving a 4-year deal to somebody else who just breaks down and fails, like somebody you signed as a free agent. But I know that's probably the fan in me talking, and I understand that.
You think that they would do both, though? They think they'd give Soto a $750 deal and then bring in Alonso for a 4-year deal? Yeah, exactly.
If I had to guess, I think it's one or the other. And I'm making it clear right now that as much as I'm a Pete Alonso fan and I would love him on the team, I want to be realistic. Like, yeah, I know Steve Cohen's got more money than God, but I don't know, man. Like, being honest, like, no, I don't think they would invest, $75 million in Juan Soto and Pete Alonso. Because I think Juan's definitely getting 50, and now you're talking about $25 million. No, I don't think they would. And I think that they have enough depth where they can sell, hey, Juan's going to grow up with the other kids on this team. More from David Stearns.
Have you made a decision on whether or not you will hire a GM this time?
I have not made a firm decision. I'm not eager to do it. I think we've got a good group in place here. I'm pleased with the performance that our front office has had. In general, I think we've got a nice leadership team going. If someone were to become available that I think would be really tough to pass up, then I'd certainly consider it. But we're not going to go through and entertain a huge search process here because I think we've got a pretty good group going.
Cool. I got to be honest with you at this moment. At this moment, I may care in the middle of February. Do not care. Next question.
Do you anticipate asking back the entire coaching staff, or do you think there might be some changes there?
At the end of every season, by practice, we're going to go through a little bit of an organizational evaluation period. We're going through that right now. And so not at the point where I can make any declarative statements. I'll say that I was pleased by and large with the performance of our major league staff. And I think we have a lot of good coaches.
I would give Jeremy Barnes a raise because when he figured out that Devin Williams was tipping a pitch and Pete Alonso found out about it, that in a lot of ways was one of the most important hits in Meta history. It changed so much. It changed everything about this year, and it changed, I think, the views of Pete Alonso. So give Jeremy Barnes a raise.
Yeah, what does he do exactly for us?
He's one of the hitting coaches. They've got multiple hitting coaches. He's one of them.
Well, kudos to him. Give him a raise, like you said.
Give him lots of money. All right, let's hear another question for David Stearns.
Also, you look at your starting rotation. You have 3 big free agents, 3 holes there. How do you think you'll go about rebuilding that rotation?
Yeah, this isn't new to us. We faced a similar task last offseason. We're going to have to replace innings. Certainly part of that could potentially be from some of those guys returning, or we may look elsewhere. But we're going to have to add starting pitching. We're going to have to add multiple starters. We understand that. We went into last offseason with the same need, and I think we'll be able to do it.
As he was giving that answer, I was thinking back to a Rico we did in spring training where we knew, okay, this is a very transition Met rotation, but let's hope that somebody steps up. Like somebody enters that rotation that we're not even thinking of, because the reality is the Mets have one guy that we knew would be in the rotation the following year, and that was Kodai Senga. Now, to be fair, Paul Blackburn is on this roster. He's having off-season surgery. He's under team control. Paul Blackburn is a starting option for the New York Mets. But the guy that shockingly became a lock, in my opinion, like how can anyone debate it, is David Peterson. I never thought that would happen. So right now, you're looking at Kodai Senga, you're looking at David Peterson, and then you've got options. That's what I like to call them. Guys, not with literal minor league options, but options where that guy could be in the rotation, that guy could be traded, that guy could be in the bullpen. Those guys I'm talking about are Paul Blackburn, Tyler McGill, Jose Budo, guys of that nature. Now you have some younger guys too, Brandon Sproat, Late Tidwell, guys like that. But right now I would say it's Kodai Senga and it's David Peterson because they're all free agents. By the way, I wanted to read this quick email. Speaking of starting pitching free agents before we get back to David Stearns, I don't know how many Met fans feel this way, but Nick Stasiak writes, Sean Manaea pulled a Chris Bassett. Great all year until the biggest start. I hope we aren't the team that gives him the big money. Don't let the door hit you on the way out. Here's why I will be the one person. I'm sure a lot of people are screaming at their radios right now, but I will join in and say, Nick, respectfully, you're wrong. I think you were very emotional after that start. Sean Manaea was not good in Game 6. To complete the 99 comparisons, neither was Al Leiter. Al Leiter didn't get a freaking out in Game 6 against the Braves. That didn't mean screw him, get rid of him. I think Sean Manaea pitched well enough in big games in the postseason to not have that start define him. Now, if you don't want to keep Sean Manaea because of his age and because you just don't buy that this season was legitimate, you just don't buy that the adjustments he made after seeing Chris Sale are sustainable, or you don't want to give him the kind of contract he ends up getting. By the way, those are all fair opinions. But I don't think it's fair to say, he screwed up the biggest start of the year, F him. Because I think it's ignoring the other big starts he made. Unlike Chris Bassett. Chris Bassett made 2 big starts for the Mets. They both sucked. He screwed up both of them. It's a little different than Sean Manaea. Sean Manaea also pitched well. More from David Stearns.
So where do you view some of your pitchers showed a lot of improvement from inside the system? David Peterson, Tyler McGill, Jose Budo. Where do you view them next season? Are they all starters next year? Are they relievers? What's your position on them?
I think we'll see how the offseason evolves and where we are in spring training and beyond. And I think one of the things we saw this year and continue to learn is that roles evolve over the course of the season, and a particular pitcher may be a starter in one segment of the season and then pitching high leverage innings out of the bullpen in another. And it could go the other way as well. So all 3 of those players have demonstrated the ability to both start and relieve at the major league level. And sitting here a couple days after our season just ended, I'm certainly not in a position where I can say what role they're going to fill on our team come spring training or even the regular season.
You know how I would determine that, by the way? Now, David Peterson's in the rotation. I don't include him in that discussion. But Jose Budo, Tyler McGill, a lot of it comes down to free agency. A lot of it comes down to, did you sign Corbin Burns? A lot of it comes down to, did you sign Tanner Scott? Like, if the Mets have a really effective free agency when it comes to relief pitchers, they invest a lot in relief pitchers. They end up signing Clay Holmes and Tanner Scott. I just give you 2 guys. And that, I think both would be pretty big investments. But let's just say that happens, right? The Mets are more aggressive in adding bullpen arms than rotation arms. Then it's different. You may look at Jose Budo and say, hey, you're more valuable to us in the rotation than you are out of the bullpen. Or let's say the market for starting pitchers works out better for the Mets, and they add a bunch of starting pitchers, and the bullpen has a lot of holes, and let's say David Stearns just doesn't want to invest in the bullpen. Then Jose Budo will have more value out of the bullpen. So I think in the case of Budo, it's where can you help me the most? You're not making decisions around Budo. You're not saying, well, I'm not pursuing that starting pitcher because I need Budo in my rotation. I think that circumstances will help dictate that. I think that who you sign, how many guys you sign, will help answer that. The only person that, in my opinion, has absolutely earned a rotation spot, even if David Stearns doesn't want to admit it, is David Peterson. I think he's absolutely earned it. He would be in my rotation at the start of the 2025 season.
Just kind of on along the same lines with Ronnie Mauricio, he should be fully ready to go in spring training. Where do you view him moving forward?
I think step one for Ronnie is we need to get him doing baseball activities. We're now working on close to a year without baseball activities. And so, that's our goal as an organization. I do think we're making progress. It has definitely gone a lot slower than we expected. But we need to get him on the field doing baseball activities, and then we can start thinking about what that position distribution might look like.
Why? Like, that'd be my fault. Why has it been so slow? I know that we haven't been focused on it because, the Mets were playing October baseball games, but Ronnie Mauricio had that torn ACL in December, right? Or January. I mean, it was a long time ago. So for him not to have returned to baseball activities feels a little bit concerning. More from David Stearns.
Hi, David. Perhaps just broadly speaking, but how much would you say pitching is a priority this offseason?
Sure. Yeah, pitching's a priority this offseason. I think we're going to have to fill some innings. Again, very similar to what we were facing heading into the offseason last year. I think we'll have the ability to do it. And so I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, how can it not be? I mean, they've got, like, if I go through who's under contract, like who they have as locks, there's not a lot of guys. They've got, I mentioned Senga. You want to include Paul Blackburn in the rotation, fine. I don't think he has to be, but he's going to be here. You've got Tyler McGill, you've got David Peterson, you've got Jose Budo. You've got all the younger guys who may not be ready. Like, I don't think Brandon Sproat's necessarily ready. Blake Tidwell, Mike Vassell. In the bullpen, here are your bullpen guys, by the way, because we always think about the rotation. You have Edwin Diaz. There's a team option on Phil Maton. So we'll see. And then it's Reed Garrett, who I think is almost close to guaranteed a bullpen spot. And then you've got Danny Young, Huascar Brazoban, Alex Young. That's it. The rest of them are free agents. Adam Ottavino, free agent. Ryan Stanek, free agent. Brooks Raley, who I'd be very intrigued to bring back. I think the Mets really missed having Brooks Raley. Brooks Raley was one of the number one guys they missed. And Drew Smith, not that you care. So they could use 3 legitimate arms in that bullpen, and I'm being conservative. And then obviously the starting pitching. So pitching, yes, it's a priority. Now, I've got good news and I got bad news. The good news is there's a lot more from David Stearns that we are going to explore. The bad news is that'll be on a special tomorrow edition of Rico Brogna. That's right, a 2-parter. We have started to dissect what David Stearns had to say, but we're not done yet. We took a little bit of a hibernation because Pete and I got very sick, but the Rico Brogna's back, and we ain't going away. So I do want to thank you very much for listening. I want to thank you for subscribing, and I will do my best to update you on the schedule. There will be Ricos every Wednesday and a Thursday, Sunday and a Monday, but there's going to be a lot of extras, including part 2 of the David Stearns press conference. We will post that on Friday evening. So the reason we're going to post that on Friday evening is because you probably don't want to watch the World Series. We're going to counter program the crap out of the World Series. And by the way, if you do want to watch the World Series, no big deal. Download, subscribe, watch it on YouTube. It'll be there whenever you want. That's the beauty of Rico Brogna. So thank you very much for listening and subscribing. And Friday night, Saturday morning, whenever you want to wake up and download it, please take a listen to part 2 of the David Stearns press conference reaction. Thank you very much for listening to the latest edition of Rico Brogna.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Rico Brogna podcast. It's amazing, isn't it? Make sure you download it now to keep it on you at all times.